Everyone, so this week we're going to talk a little bit more about body condition scoring and weight, how you might assess the weight of your horse. Many of you also might go out and say, oh, it's an average 1,000-pound horse, 1,200-pound horse, but how do you hone in on that a little bit? And body condition is something that we've hit the topic a little bit and kind of what is the ideal body condition score, knowing the scale, but we're going to go through a little bit of that today. It's imperative that you know how to also assess body condition score, or BCS, on a horse. And so with that, we just have a little PowerPoint that we're going to go through to talk through kind of how to assess that BCS, and then our plan is we'll talk through maybe how to assess weight, and then we'll go down to the barn, we'll grab a horse, and we'll do just that on them and kind of walk you through each step. And so with that, let's roll through a little bit of this PowerPoint. Again, this is really just to tell you kind of how to do body condition score. First off, realize, again, we're going to show you on a single horse today, but this is something you have to go out and practice. You have to do a lot of horses to become really good at. And as we go through this, the big thing to realize is you really have to touch that horse. You can't just look at a horse, look at a picture, and say they are this body condition score. I might be able to say, yes, looking at a picture, they're very low, or they're very high and they're fat, and kind of make certain determinations, but to really hone in on that BCS, we have to be able to touch them, okay? And so the first thing to realize with body condition scoring is that it's this numerical scale, 1 to 9. It's a standardized system, okay? Used across pretty much all disciplines, all breeds, and across all of the United States and much of the world as well. And so because we have this standardized system, it makes it really easy for me to say this horse is a BCS of a 7 and call up a colleague in Virginia and say, hey, I got a BCS of a 7 and they're getting fed this, and they know exactly what that looks like, okay? And so that's the benefit, again, of having a system that everybody uses that is the same, okay? No need for specialized equipment. All you need is to know the scale and have your hands, okay? Again, you have to be able to palpate the horse, feel the horse, to truly be able to accurately assess that body condition of the horse, okay? So as we've said it done here, done visually and palpating, okay? I'll give you some of the initial visual markers. One of those will be if you can see ribs or not, okay? If you can see ribs, we're at a BCS of a 4 or below. If you can't see ribs, we're at a BCS of a 5 or above. And so that's the first distinction visually. Then you, of course, you might look at a horse and say, oh my gosh, they got a huge cresty neck, they're just rotund, they're really, really fat, and obviously you know they're going to be higher on the body condition score, but that's where palpating comes in handy as well. And we'll talk about each of those 6 areas that you're going to evaluate. It is probably important that you know that this universal scale, this body condition scoring system that we use today, the 1 through 9, was developed by Dr. Don ANEQ. It was actually during his graduate work. He was looking at pregnant mares, and he needed a system to be able to assess fat on them. And so he created this system that we still use to this day, okay? And so again, remarkable that that turned into a great system that truly we needed. And so body condition scoring is something that you should do on your horses or horses in your barn that you're managing frequently, okay? And if they're too fat, you adjust their feed intake, okay? Maybe up exercise as well. If they're too skinny, we bump up the feed a little bit, but you need to walk through your barns and do that body condition scoring, take weights on stuff, and kind of see where you're at and adjust accordingly. Again, that's part of us being in charge of the welfare of our horses, okay? So this diagram, again, looks a little busy. I realize that. Don't worry about all the anatomical parts on this. The key here is just to point out, and we'll talk through some of these, the 6 areas that we're going to assess to be able to evaluate body condition scoring, okay? I kind of go about this in a backwards C motion, okay? You can do it however you want. And so the first area that we're going to evaluate is the neck, or kind of the crest of the neck. As a horse builds up a lot of fat, this will, again, get a lot of fat on top of it. You can feel the entire crest of the neck, to the point in some animals, in some breeds of horses, especially more predisposed, that crest of the neck will almost start to lay over and fall over, okay? We can then go to the withers, okay, looking at the kind of the fat pads on each side of the withers. We can come down the back, and so as we see that crease down the back, we'll talk about that here in a moment, but looking at that crease down the back, whether it's flat, or if the horse is really skinny, you're going to see the spinous process there, or if they're extremely fat, it goes in the opposite direction, okay? And now all of a sudden you have this horse that you could roll an egg down their back because, again, they got a large amount of fat there. And so you could always push this circle up a little bit, but we're going to look at that crease down the horse's back. And then this, we're really going to look at either side of the dock or the tailhead, okay? You'll start to get kind of rounder pockets of fat on each side of the dock or the tailhead, and if you start to poke it a little bit, as it builds up fat, it'll kind of jiggle a little bit versus being kind of sunken in that area, okay? And then we continue to come around. The ribs is a big one, okay? And so, again, if we can immediately see ribs, we know we're a 4 or below. If we can't see ribs, we're a 5 or above. But with that 5, they're easily palpable, okay? And so we can go in there and still palpate them, feel them, don't have to push very hard. As we get to a 6 or maybe more so a 7, those ribs are going to be pretty tough to find and have to push a little bit harder. But we're going to evaluate those ribs and how much fat is covering them. And the next thing we could look at is kind of just behind that horse's shoulder, okay, and how much fat is built up there. And so we evaluate all these areas together. When you do BCS, classically, again, people look at the ribs and they say, oh, that horse is skinny or that horse is fat. Make sure you look beyond just the ribs. Yes, that is one of the points that we evaluate, but we want to do it all collectively, okay? Don't determine your entire body condition score only off of this right here, okay? Sometimes horses build up fat in certain areas more than others, okay? And so again, look at everything as a whole. You can do it however you want. Like I said, I can go kind of this backwards C shape, but evaluate all of them is the key. This is, again, another busy thing. We don't need to read all of it. I can always give you guys additional handouts. There's a couple ways to present this. The key here in the few take-homes is that scale of 1 to 9, okay? 1 being poor, extremely emaciated, whereas 9 is extremely fat, overweight, obese, okay? There's a lot in between. Our ideal body condition score for a horse is a 5 to 6, okay? 5 to 6. If you have a horse that is this elite athlete, maybe you have a thoroughbred on the track, something like that, and they are just pumping in the feed, having a lot of calories, a lot of intake, but they are working their tail off, they might occasionally be right around a 4, 4.5, okay? That's acceptable, okay? They are getting plenty of food, but they're working extremely hard. But for the most part, for majority of adult horses, 5 to 6 should be an ideal body condition score. And so you can go through and you can see all these descriptions. You guys could look them up as well. This 1, if you find a horse that is truly a 1, we'll look at some pictures. They're not that great in terms of trying to assess things, but a 1 is tough to bring back, okay? Sometimes they're so far gone in terms of no fat on the body whatsoever. It takes a long time, if any, that they don't also develop to bring them back, but they don't also develop sometimes other health problems along the way. And so we can see our very thin. Hopefully, you should never really see a 1, 2, or hopefully not even a 3 in your time in the equine industry. I hope you never have to deal with that. If you deal with a lot of rescues, maybe your Bureau of Animal Protection, something like that, seizing horses, going to people's property, I bet maybe you come across things like this. But for the average person, hopefully you never come across that horse that is anywhere in the 1 to 3. You're going to see some 4s. It's not uncommon to all of a sudden get a horse that's losing a little bit of weight, need to put some back on. But most of the horses we see are probably in the 4 to 7, okay? And then you can adjust accordingly. Oh, they're getting a little fleshy, let's cut back a little bit. Oh, they're getting a little thin, let's increase that caloric intake a little bit. So hopefully you don't see too many of the extremes. That fat and extremely fat, again, just as unhealthy for that animal, okay? Obesity is a big problem. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. And so this gets really busy just in terms of how these 6 areas might look. There's also good handouts out there. I realize you can't read this, but this just showing you a handout that basically does the 1 through 9 scale, and then each of the 6 areas individually broken out and what to look for in each of those. And so there's some good ways to kind of evaluate that. You can keep something like this around as a cheat sheet next time you go out and look at the BCS of your horse. This is just looking at that spinous process. We talk about that crease down that horse's back. And so when you look at that horse that is extremely thin, emaciated, here you see this line right here. That's essentially what it looks like. It's protruding up, okay? All of a sudden you get to that horse that's more like that ideal body condition score, the 5 or 6, and it's like this. It looks pretty flat across the top of the back. And then all of a sudden you get that horse that is overweight, obese, goes to the other extreme, and now all of a sudden you see this dip right here, okay? Again, you oftentimes tease that horse's back could hold water, or you could roll an egg down that horse's back, and you could do all of the such, but again, just notice how that fat all of a sudden develops in these areas, okay? And so obviously you look at that horse and you can see the entire spinal process. You know they're thin. You'll see some on pictures here in the next few slides to the other extreme. Okay, so I just want you to be aware of that. And so, like I said, pictures are not the best way to evaluate. I'll probably roll through these rather quick because you can only tell so much from pictures, but it'll give us some talking points, okay? This horse, not the best hair coat, but when you look at them, they're a little fuzzy too. You can absolutely see ribs. You'll see some pictures on the next slides that there's not as much hair coat, but we can see all of the spinous process, the hips, sunken in back here on each side of the tail head. No fat behind the shoulder. The neck is just completely lacking fat. And so this is just an example. You see more pictures here where, again, no fat on these horses whatsoever. You can absolutely see ribs. You can look at everything in here. You can see all points of hip. Nothing like this should be protruding, all sunken in. Look at the underbelly and the abdomen of this horse. Again, no fat on these guys whatsoever. This is really tough to, again, bring these horses back, and it takes a long time, okay? Sometimes if we're trying to increase the body condition score of a horse, or maybe go the opposite way and get them to lose weight, sometimes it might take about a month to see a change in just one body condition score, okay? BCS of a 2, again, only slightly more fat still. Again, this thin horse, but only slightly more fat than, say, that 1. Absolutely still see ribs. The entire spinous process sunken in on each side of the tail head. Not going to be much fat, if any, along the neck. And so, again, just a slight increase over that. We could look at that 3. And again, you can still see the entire spinous process. Not much fat along the neck here. Absolutely still visualize ribs. Remember, if you can see ribs, you're at a 4 or below, okay? Really here, still sunken in on each side of that dock or the tail head. That will start to level out as we get kind of at our 5 or 6. But this horse still needs some calories, okay? So hopefully you can look at that and tell that this horse is thin. Here we're getting to a 4. Again, for that, athlete that is in work, that is doing intense exercise, can be okay with it. At a first glance, looking at this horse, granted I don't know his background, I don't think that's this horse, okay? And so I think this horse needs a little bit more feed, a few more calories in his diet. You can see those ribs right here, okay? And so just being able to see those ribs, I know I'm at a 4 or below. But now if you can see this line right here, we have some fat that's along the neck right here, okay? I can still see a little bit of the spinous process. It's nothing like it was in those previous 3 pictures, but it's not quite completely flat and leveled out. So, and then again, we look at the dock or the tail head. It's pretty flat, but we don't have any bulging fat right there. This horse actually has a little bit of fat just behind the shoulder right here. But again, looking at him, he needs a few calories, but I'm not concerned about this horse. We can put some weight on him. We move to our 5. Again, not the best picture, but just seeing, again, we kind of flatten out a little bit along the back. You might have a little bit of spinous process showing, but not much. Decent fat along the neck. Can't see the ribs anymore, but if you go in and palpate them, you can easily feel them. We're pretty flat on each side of the dock or the tail head, but we're not bulging just yet. And again, this would kind of be that ideal body condition score. Same with our 6 here. Again, we haven't developed this big cresty neck. We've got some fat along the neck a little bit. Ribs a little bit tougher to feel. Same with the dock and the tail head. Again, good bit of fat on each side, but it's not bulging. It's not going to start bouncing, jiggling yet. Our crease down the back is pretty flat right now. And again, we've got a little bit of fat behind the shoulder here. And so, again, make sure you're assessing all areas. But this 5 or 6, this is our ideal horse, okay? Pictures are tough, though. 7, this horse needs to lose some weight, okay? And so we're just getting on the other side of this a little bit. This horse is getting a little cresty on his neck. If you take your hand up along this neck and kind of feel it all the way down, again, you're going to feel those fat deposits. This back just barely starting to invert a little bit to where, again, you could roll that egg down. No longer see ribs, and it's going to be much tougher to be able to feel them. You're going to have to push pretty hard on that horse that's a 7 to be able to feel those ribs. They're still going to be there probably, but you're going to have to push pretty hard. Fat pockets behind the shoulder right here, again, starts to kind of blend a little more, and then you're going to see a horse starting to bulge just a little bit on each side of the dock, the tail head, and being able to kind of jiggle that a little bit. 8 and 9 are tough pictures. This is a bit skewed. This is a Norwegian fjord. You get some ponies, other breeds, and again, just the mohawk of his mane right here makes it look a little bit different than it typically is. But at the end of the day, just realize cresty neck, inverted along the back. Can't feel the ribs whatsoever anymore. Kind of just blends, you see, from the shoulder into the ribs. There's not much definition in there whatsoever. Bulges on each side of the dock or the tail head, but this horse needs to lose some weight. 9, again, just one step up from that, extremely overweight and obese. And so, again, that is a detriment to these horses as well. They, again, need to cut back on calories and feed intake. The other big thing is exercise, okay? Just like us as humans, leading causes of obesity, it's nutrition and exercise, okay? Same would go true for our horses, okay? They have these large caloric intakes and they're just sitting around in a stall or a pasture not doing anything, okay? And so those two things kind of go hand in hand. A couple other variables just to look at. Older horses can be tough. Sometimes they deposit fat in certain areas more than others, okay? And so this was just a picture to show you maybe some abnormal fatty deposits. And so that's why it's also important to assess all 6 areas collectively and then gain that larger picture, not just looking at one area. This horse has a little cresty neck right here, and that's lasted. Some breeds more so than others. Maybe Morgans or some others, Pasafinos, have a little cresty neck, but they don't show it everywhere else in their body. So evaluate everything together. Again, that older horse can be a tough one, but it's still important to look at their BCS. So a couple things when you're scoring them. Look at them from the profile view, front, rear, and kind of make your initial assessment just looking at them, and then walk up, and you have to then be able to feel things and palpate things, okay? You can first determine, just looking at them, whether, again, you think they are 5 or greater or 4 and below, okay? And again, that's based on simply if you can see ribs. If you can see ribs, we're 4 or below. Can't see ribs, 5 or above, okay? Like I said, feel all the parts of the horse. Move around those 6 areas, whatever fashion you want, as long as you cover all of them. And I would tell you, especially as you start to hone in and you do a lot of body condition scoring, it's helpful if you go out with somebody that's done it before and you can kind of train your eye to it a little bit, but half scores are fine. Commonly we say, oh, this horse is a 5.5, they're a 4.5. It's easy for a horse to kind of fall between 2 body condition scores. I don't think anybody's good enough to start splitting them more than that. I don't want anybody coming back and tell me this horse is a 5.25 or they're 5 3/4, etc. Okay, half scores are fine. Don't split them more than that. Maybe if you're doing something for research and you're averaging across 10 people's different scores, maybe you arrive at something like that. But again, they should really be kept as no more than a half score. But that's perfectly fine to note it as such. And so with that, I think we'll talk through weight a little bit, why weight is also important in that kind of calculation of how the horse is doing nutritionally. And so we'll talk about some ways we can assess weight, and then we'll head down into the barn and go through all of this on a horse. Okay, so we've gone through body condition scoring and how to assess that, the 6 areas, again, emphasizing that it truly is something that you can't just look at a picture, you also need to be able to palpate and feel that horse. But I want to talk a little bit now about different ways that you might assess the weight of a horse. When is this important? Well, one, nutrition, right? We feed based on body weight, okay? Maybe you're doing 2% of the horse's body weight. Well, it's important you know how much they weigh, okay? Maybe you're given a dewormer or somebody is sedating or doing something else. Again, everything is given off of body weight, and so it's important that we have an idea of how much that horse weighs, okay? And so it helps us also with that whole picture. If somebody tells me I've got, height is in there too, and we'll do height as we go downstairs, but somebody tells me I've got a 14-hand horse that weighs 1,000 pounds and is a BCS of a 7.5, I've got a pretty good picture in my mind of what that horse looks like, okay, between the body condition score, the weight, the height of that horse, and it kind of puts everything together. And so these are 3 things that I want you to be comfortable to be able to look at. And so the first things that we would mention is just in terms of that horse's weight, how we might be able to go about that. The first one that we could look at would just be a visual assessment. I want you to eventually hone your eye. If you've got a research study or you're weighing a bunch of horses across the scale, do yourself a favor. Guess how much those horses weigh before they go across the scale. See how good you are, okay? And so you can hopefully get to a point where you can look at a horse and say, oh, they're probably 1,400 pounds, okay? Or maybe they're about 900 pounds. And it is still important sometimes to weigh them or do other things that we'll discuss to be able to calculate that weight, but visual assessment is definitely something that you can hone, okay? And so the first could be visual assessment. The next thing that we could look at, and we'll do downstairs, would be weight tape, okay? And we'll compare all these after we've taken measurements today. And so we could also look at weight tape. This is going to be something that just simply is a single tape that goes around the heart girth of the horse, okay? You can go to any local farm and range supply store, go online, and order a simple weight tape. And so they will also, generally on one side, have a height measurement where you can then pull it up and assess height. So what else can we do? The last one that is kind of you calculating would be what we refer to as this formula, okay? This formula is heart girth squared times body length divided by 330, okay? Now, this 330, this denominator is used for adult horses. If it's not an adult horse, that may change, but for majority of you guys, that's just fine. And so heart girth squared, that heart girth measurement is essentially what we're doing in the same area with the weight tape, okay? We're going around there, but now we're just going to use a cloth tape measure to be able to assess how many inches that is, okay, around the heart girth. And then times body length, okay? This should be essentially from point of shoulder to basically point of buttock, okay? So that entire measurement is going to be a little bit of an angle across that whole horse. But try to keep your tape from wrapping around that horse and get it and kind of just eye it as straight as you can, okay? So heart girth squared times body length divided by 330. Generally, this is more accurate than your weight tape, and you don't need anything fancy, okay? You could just take a sewing tape measure, a cloth tape measure, and be able to assess this on the horse. Why is this generally more accurate than the weight tape? Well, what does this take into account that the weight tape doesn't? All the weight tape does is measure around the heart girth, okay? And we talked about anatomy conformation in the beginning. Maybe you have a horse that's really long in the back, long in the loin, as compared to one that's very short in the back, short in the loin, okay? It has no account for how long that horse is. Some of them are long as a freight train, okay? And if they're the same circumference around the heart girth, it's going to tell you that they're the same weight. And so this one takes into account heart girth, but also how long that horse is, and tries to put that all together in a calculation. And so we'll go through and we'll do all of these. The last one that we could do that is going to be the most accurate is basically pushing them across a scale. We'll hopefully do that today as well. But it's good to do them in this order. Say, if you're going to try things out, what's a visual estimate? Let's do the weight tape, the formula, and then we'd run them across the scale and see how we did in all of our measurements and see how they compare, okay? Most of the time, all of these will be give or take within about 10% of each other, but we'll see how that looks on a single horse today. This formula is something easy to remember. Like I said, the cool thing about this, you don't need to have a weight tape laying around. Just any kind of cloth tape measure, something that will easily do the circumference is basically all you can use. And so I think with that, we will head down to one of the barns, we'll grab a horse, and then let's walk through maybe how to assess that body condition score, then move to our weight, going through all of this, and then we'll also measure height. We've got a really cool, good good height stick that I'll recommend to you guys, okay? Remembering that height is measured in hands. How many inches is in a hand? 4 inches, okay? And so we'll go downstairs and we'll look at all those assessments. Okay, so we're down here in the barn. We got our willing candidate right here. And my goal is just to talk you through BCS, how we might go about assessing it, and then let's take some various weight measurements and look at what that weight comes to. Again, good in getting that whole picture, and then last we will also take height and run this horse across the scale. And so again, I just reiterate, now that we're down here, this is always a good thing you can carry around with you as you go down to the barn or go look at your horse and try to assess body condition score. This just shows you very simply the 6 areas to evaluate, reminds you, shows you the scale of 1 through 9, and then with the 6 areas you're going to evaluate what each area may look like. And so always a good thing that you can fold up, put in your pocket a little bit, and then go and evaluate. And so if we're going to do that on her, the first things we do, like we said, you got to palpate, okay? And so I'm going to look at this horse's neck. She's a little crusty on the neck, okay? A lot of our horses are in, we'll say, good flesh right now. Hopefully not much are overweight, but again, they're in good flesh. They're not getting exercised as much with COVID. But we could go through, we'll assess everything and see where we're at. And so she's a little crusty on the neck, a little bit of fat right there. Again, you've got to be able to palpate it. You can't just look at it probably and tell. We can look on each side of the withers. Slight fat pads, not bad. Looking down her back, she's pretty flat. She's not inverted yet, okay? There's no roll an egg down, hold water. So she's pretty good down the top line right here. We could look on each side of the dock or the tail head. We're pretty flat. As we start to get to 7, 8, 9, this starts to bulge a little more. This becomes a lot more bouncy and kind of jiggle with that fat. We're not quite there, but again, we're round. Come back around. Now on this horse, even on camera, you should be able to say, can you see ribs? No, you can't see ribs. You immediately know you're at a 5 or above, okay? We cannot visualize her ribs. The next thing is, how easily can I feel them? We know right off the bat, I'll tell you just leading in, we're more than a 5, okay? Just by looking at that cresty neck, again, some fat deposition further around, I can still feel ribs in each individual rib. I just have to push a little firmer, okay? Then we can come in and we can kind of look at fat behind her shoulder right here, and again, how it kind of blends from shoulder into her barrel, okay? And so if I had to assess this horse in just looking at her, again, with everything put together, I'd say we're at least a 6, maybe a 6.5 on her. I don't think we're quite to a 7, okay? And so that's our assessment of body condition score. But again, remembering it's this universal system that I can call up anyone and say, hey, I got a horse that's a BCS of a 6.5, and they know what that means and what that looks like. And so the next things that we could do would be to assess the horse's weight, and just to walk you through a few ways that you might be able to do that. And so I've brought with me our simple weight tape. And so this is all weight tape is. Again, you can go to any farm and ranch supply store and pick up a simple weight tape. And you're going to notice they are in pounds and kilograms, okay? And so a lot of times I tell you that because if you are given a dose, especially a lot of sedation or things like that, or other drugs that your vet might do, they can obviously do the calculation adjustment from pounds to kilograms, but a lot of things we do in mgs per kg or milligrams per kilogram, okay? And so we're one of the few countries that still do things in an odd fashion. And so if we're going to do this weight tape, again, we're just going to do this around this horse's heart girth. And so it doesn't have to be anything fancy. I can take this, go around horse's heart girth, and then we're going to go back and basically see just simply where this overlaps, okay? Now, she's a little rotund, right? And so if we look at this right here, we could always push her back a little bit or make sure that we're not in a bad spot, but we're pretty good in terms of heart girth. And so, again, we're right about, according to this, maybe 1324. So this is showing us about 1330 in terms of her weight, okay? And so, again, all it is simply taking it to where this overlaps. I can maybe get it to, 1306, but let's do the other ones and see where we're at. And then lastly, like I said, we will run her across the scale. But a weight tape is a good thing to do, okay? I maybe didn't mention it to you guys, we did it upstairs, but even when just doing body condition score, you might look at him and again just visually say, what's this horse weigh, okay? We classically say that horse that's 1,000 pounds on average or 550 kilograms or so. She's a little over that, and we could even tell just in looking at her and her size, okay? As you get to a lot of these warm bloods and kind of bigger horses, again, weight's going to go up as well. So the next thing we could do would be our formula, okay? And so we could simply do heart girth squared times body length divided by 330, okay? And so we're going to take this and just simply put it all the way around. And so this is going to be the same as what that measurement of the weight tape was in terms of location. And so we've got it in terms of up on our withers, right around heart girth, and we're going to see where we overlap. We're right about 80 inches, okay? And so we'll remember that. We're 80 inches here. And then the next thing we're going to do is simply take this and we're going to go from our point of shoulder right here to our point of buttock, okay? And so it's going to be upwards at a little bit of an angle a little bit. And so I'm going to take this and I might just have you hold that, and you can go all the way to the back and kind of just imagine, don't let it wrap around the horse too much. And so what's that?
About 67, 68.
Okay, and so again, we're kind of just sighting with that point of shoulder, not wrapping it all the way around the horse, and then again going to that furthermost point with the body length, and again getting 67, 68. And so we could take our calculator and do heart girth squared times body length, okay, and then divide that by 330, and we can come up with a measurement, and we get right about 1318, okay? And so we're pretty close to what we did with the weight tape, okay? We were somewhere 1320, 1306, and so for these, they came out pretty close. But again, if you have a lot of horses that you're doing and you're looking at a comparison between the two, a lot of times that weight tape is off by about 10%, okay? And so generally taking into account that body length is a little more accurate, but you didn't need anything special to be able to do that, okay? I think before we go over to the scale, we could also talk about, while she's standing here, our height, okay? And measuring height is something that also helps to give us that full picture, okay? And so if we have that horse's weight, we have their body condition score, and we also have their height. Again, I can imagine in my head exactly what that horse might look like. You can call up your folks at Purina or your other feed store and again say, hey, I'm feeding my horse this, I think I need to adjust things, and they're going to ask you how much the horse weigh, okay? What is their body condition score? And this is all pertinent information. But in regards to height, this is probably my favorite height stick that exists out in the market. You can buy them a lot of different places. It's all made out of aluminum. And so this pulls up, this locks into place, and then this pops in and then pulls up, and you've got a little level that sits on it right here. And so you can see as this moves up and down, and so this size in hands, so this would be 14 hands, 14.1, 14.2, 14.3, and then 15 hands, okay? And so where is height measured? Peak of the withers, right? And so we're on good level ground. If we weren't, again, move on to some asphalt pavement somewhere else that is level. You don't want to be obviously taking this in a hole. She's pawing a little bit. We'll get her to stop doing that, and then hopefully stand still momentarily just long enough for us to, we could look at our level, make sure that we are getting a correct measurement. And that looks pretty good right there. We're peak of the withers, we're level, and so if we spin this back around and look at it, we're about 16 hands on her, okay? We're not quite, so this is 16 hands, we're right here. We're not quite to even 16.1 or even the half of that, okay? And so we'll just call her 16 hands, but again, good way to be able to assess height. And so you can then collapse this entire height stick, and they're good to have around, put in your tack room, etc. And so I think with that, kind of the last thing that we'll do is we'll take her over to the scale, and let's go see what her actual weight is and how the weight tape and the formula compare. Okay, so we've got her over here at the scale. This scale, again, happens to be one that's sitting inside a little bit of a cage here just to keep them from stepping off. Sometimes you'll just have a simple platform, but these livestock scales are pretty common and good to have around, okay? If you're gonna have a lot of horses on site, it's really easy to have a scale. Again, maybe once a month, every couple of weeks, maybe more frequently. You walk through your barns, depending on the number of horses you have, and you assess body condition score, you run them across the scale, you record weights, and you make adjustments from there. And so let's see what her actual weight is. So 1310, okay? And so you can see that our weight tape and our formula were pretty actually spot on, okay? Our weight tape was a little high maybe in the beginning, and that's not uncommon, but our formula was right in there. And so again, pretty easy way to be able to assess that weight of your horse, okay? And so hopefully with that today you learned a little bit about body condition score, the importance of it, how to use that standardized system, as well as various ways that you can take weight, okay? We could do that visual assessment. If you're gonna run these horses across the scale and a whole lot of them, again, guess how much each one weighs, okay? And then train your eye. You can also do that weight tape, do the formula. You can see they're both pretty accurate, and sometimes that weight tape overestimates a little bit. We can also run them across that scale. Height stick, again, that aluminum height stick is probably the best one out there, but that's another piece of that calculation. In terms of getting that full assessment of the horse, okay? And so if you have height, you have weight, you have BCS, you've got a very good picture of what's going on. And that all relates to nutrition and the health of the horse, and you might use that weight for a number of other things regarding just management of the horse. And so with that, everyone, I think we'll leave you till next week.